Welcome back to another episode of the Braun Performance and Rehab Podcast, powered by ISOFIT, Oro Muscles, and Firefly Recovery. ISOFIT is my go-to for all things isometric strength training. For more on ISOFIT, be sure to check out isofit.com. Oro Muscles revolutionizes rehabilitation with real-time, actionable insights into muscle activity with live biofeedback and instant analysis, which has made a huge impact in my work with athletes. For more on Oro, be sure to check out oromuscles.com. Episodes like this are also made possible by Firefly, the official recovery provider for the Braun Performance and Rehab Podcast. For more on Firefly, be sure to check out recoveryfirefly.com. Today I'm joined by Kijana Lloyd from Bryant Men's Lacrosse. We're going to be discussing his journey rehabbing his ACL. I was fortunate enough to play a small role in his journey, and I'm thankful to have the time now to chat with Kijana and reflect about what he's been through and also where he's going. Enjoy. Kijana, welcome to the podcast. I'm super excited to work with you today, man. For people who maybe aren't familiar with you, would you mind filling them in a little bit about who you are and all the amazing things that you've got going on and all that you've been through, man?
Sure. My name's Kijana Lloyd. I'm a sophomore defenseman at Bryant University. I play men's lacrosse here. I did PT with Dan about a year and a half ago for my ACL meniscus surgery recovery, and now I'm back healthy playing a sport that I love.
Yeah, what a journey that was, dude.
Yeah,
I'm
it
just
was.
thinking about some of those memories and some of the different things that you were able to get back to and how quick and how, like, you had such a smooth recovery. I felt like you just kind of freaking crushed it from day one. What do you feel like was like the secret to your like success in ACL rehab? And, I guess we should probably start with the story too, because there's a lot of people who maybe don't know the story of what all went down for you in high school that way. So would you mind
Sure.
filling in a little bit about the backstory that way?
Sure. Yeah, I was in my second to last game of my senior year. I went to the Severn School for the last 2 years of high school out of Severn Park, Maryland, and we were playing Calvert Hall, a very, very skilled lacrosse program. Pretty routine play for me. I think it was a man down maybe or a fast break, and I just went to plant off my left leg, and my knee gave out. And it's interesting that you have never experienced injury, but when it happens, I had a pretty good clue of what it was. People didn't have to tell me. I knew exactly. I didn't know the extent or if it was a sprain, but I was pretty confident it was my ACL. And then I think literally on the ride home from my family lives in Salisbury, and so from Annapolis to Maryland, they were driving me home for the weekend after the injury. I think we called Dan. My dad already knew about you, and we had a conversation. And I knew I wanted to get started from day one. And I think that was something that was in my mind. It was never the end. I knew it wasn't the end for me. And I had the backing of my high school coach. I had the backing of my college coach. And so I knew that the smoothest recovery would be to start from day one. And so that's what we did.
Yeah, and I find it very, very unique that you like had that kind of mindset and mentality going into it because a lot of people, when this happens, they take some time to process things. They take some time to grieve, and I felt like you didn't really do that, or if you did, you just hit it really well. You just kind of like jumped right into it and started like freaking grinding it out from day one, it certainly seemed like.
Yeah, I think there's definitely some grieving internally. It's nothing that I would wish upon anybody. But I also knew that there was only one way forward and there's only one way through this. And so I wanted to get back to work. And I think part of that grieving process was progress. I knew I would feel worse if I just sat in it. And it's not a bad place. It's not the worst place to be, but it's a bad place to stay at. And so after day one, I wanted to go to day two and day three. And there was definitely some grieving, and there's grieving among the whole process, even into the later months, just because it's such a big part of you that's taken away for a certain amount of time. But I knew I almost coped with that through progress and through getting back to work and getting into PT.
Yeah, exactly. Like at the end of the day, to use your favorite line, someone had to carry the boats at the end of the day. And I knew you were going to be that guy, but I like that point that you made about just being able to get after it day by day by day, because you're right. I mean, a lot of athletes' identities is in their sport that way.
Yeah,
You're a long pole defender that way. Like you just like the sport of lacrosse is probably everything to you, if I had to guess. And it's like, it's weird to go, 6, 8, 10 months without that
yeah,
in the picture.
hmm
I'm willing to bet that was probably the longest stretch of time you've went without lacrosse in years that way. Like it's
yeah,
just a real shock to the system, but being able to find peace in the things that you are able to do
yeah,
and find that value in just getting 1% closer every single day I think it can be a very transformative process for people,
Yeah.
transformative process for athletes. You know, a lot of times, I know you've worked hard for your entire life that way. I mean, I've still got those videos somewhere of you literally chopping trees down by hand with a freaking axe. But like, I find that that grind that you have to go on throughout the course of an ACL rehab can really be such a transformative experience that it's like the energy you get from that carries over into everything else in life that follows, your studies, your work, your school, like everything that you do. It's just like people seem to find it a very transformative experience for
Yeah,
them.
yeah, I would agree, and I think the hardest part is that was not that you would lose that grind because the day before I was hurt, and the day before I hurt my ACL, I was working hard and I was grinding. And the day after, I was working hard and grinding. The hard part is that it's no longer fun, and your grind goes from running and chasing guys on the field and scoring goals and making big plays to laying on a table and trying to get your knee straight again. And it's still a grind, but you know it's a lot less fun to do that. But I knew that I had to take those steps in order to get back to where I wanted to be. And on the other side, I think you're right. It's a transformative process, and I'm a man of faith, and I think that for myself, it was huge to realize that as much as I love this sport, it is not my entire being, and it's so easy to put my entire being into this because of how much I love it. But for a period of my life, it was removed from me, and I did everything I could to get back to it. But it almost allowed me to realize that I am more than just an athlete, and
Yeah.
there's more to my identity than what I put out on there in the field. And if I never went through that process, I honestly look back now and I thank God that I went through it because of the identity that I got from it. Where if this sport were to be taken away from me, God forbid, but if it were, then I'd be okay, and I know I'd be okay because it happened before.
Right, right. And that's something that's so difficult to grasp. And I mean, huge props to you for it seems like maturing at such a young age that way. But it's so interesting that you bring up that concept of faith because that comes up sometimes when I'm talking with individuals about this. And I think that there is something just intangible, like we can't necessarily measure it, we can't necessarily quantify it. But I certainly find that there are individuals out there who cling to their beliefs and cling to, you know, certain things that way, and that effect that it has on their rehab process and their confidence and so many of these other things that we constantly talk about is just absolutely incredible. And I see it all the time with athletes that way. You know, especially in the return to sports side of things. They're like, look, you know, it could happen again. It could happen again to anyone. But, you know, I'm trusting in a plan. I'm trusting in a higher purpose. I'm trusting in something that, you know, everything is somehow going to work together for the greater good. Even if it does happen again, it's the will of the man upstairs as opposed to my own will.
Yeah, yeah, and I would agree, and I attribute it to growing up in a family that often said, "I don't know how people do without faith," and I think faith is a essential to go into this life because whether it's an ACL tear, or whether it's another injury, or whether it's just suffering in general, we're promised suffering in this world, and that's just something that we're all gonna have to face at some point. And if you have no base to go back to, if you have no belief in what is really true, then it's really hard to recover from those kind of sufferings. And I have my beliefs about Jesus and about God, and I know Dan will tag all my socials and stuff. If anybody has questions about that, reach out to me. But I do believe that faith is necessary to get through any kind of injury, and especially an ACL injury for sure.
I 100% agree with that, man. And as you were talking, you mentioned family, and earlier you mentioned your dad that way. I guess I gotta ask because I know your dad faced a number of injuries comparable to what you went through in the
Mm.
past that way. What role did he play? What role did the family play in kind of helping you throughout this whole recovery and rehab process that way? Because I'd imagine from a combination of the faith counseling piece, but also just like having been there before themselves, they probably played a very integral role in this entire
Yeah,
rehab journey for you, I would imagine.
yeah. You know, I don't think it's any easier tearing your ACL as my dad did as watching your son tear his ACL. And I think that whether it's 30 years separated or not, I think that he felt what he had went through back then and may have pinched another nerve when he saw me go through it. But at the same time, there was certain bits along the way or information or wisdom he gave me along the way that really allowed me to strive. And I know that one thing he told me recently when I originally came back was talking about that first hit and talking about that first time that you faced contact. And I know he played soccer, but that first time he got knocked down and he came back up and he was all right. And I didn't know that moment until a member of our team, it was 6'5" and about 240 pounds, hit me, and in my first practice back, and I bounced back up and I was all right. And that's when I knew, I think I'm on the other side of this. But plenty of information that they shared with me, and my dad tore his ACL and Achilles in his athletic career. Again, there's just plenty of wisdom that he gave me along the way, whether that be the surgical process, whether that be the mindset, getting back. And a lot of things I'm sharing here today are not original ideas. It's really just things that he shared with me and others along the way as well.
Yeah, ultimately, we're always standing on the shoulders of the giants that have walked before us that way. It doesn't matter who you are, even myself that way. We're always a product of those that have helped to have a positive impact on us that way. And it certainly sounds like you had that throughout your family that way. And I would assume that your surgeon might have even played a little bit of a role in that as well, because I know that when we were chatting early on, everything was kind of like picked out, like you mentioned. Like we talked on the phone, you're like, okay, I'm rehabbing with Dan. And I know you said, hey, you know what? I'm gonna have my surgery with Dr. Scott that way. Like it sounded like very like methodical in nature that way. I'm curious to hear more about what role your orthopedic providers played in that process as well that way, and what kind of made you choose to work with Dr. Scott that way, because obviously a lot of people have a lot of different options when it comes to surgery, and I'm always interested to hear why people choose the surgeon that they do, because I know that's something a lot of people struggle with, and they'll get second opinions, third opinions, fourth opinions, and that process of figuring out who your person is going to be for that stuff is not always easy.
Yeah, sure. I think for myself, I wanted to get that ball rolling, and so I think one of the first things I did, knowing that I needed to have surgery, was look for a surgeon. And we looked into our circles of trust, whether that be you and whether that be other athletes in the areas that have had surgeries of similar types. But we ultimately went with Dr. Scott, knowing his history, knowing how other people speak of him, and also when we actually spoke to him, his expertise in the subject. I mean, him himself has gone through 2 or 3 ACL injuries, and so knowing that he has experienced what I'm going through definitely gave me some confidence, knowing that he's going to treat me as if he is treating himself. And then obviously speaking with other people that we trust, with what kind of graft you want to use, what kind of graft that Scott would use. I think that gave me a lot of confidence going into the surgery, knowing that there were success stories behind me that would line me up well, and that would give me confidence in who I'm going with.
Yeah, 100%. And I think that's such a great point, is having that confidence going in, I think makes the entire rehab process afterwards significantly more straightforward and easy that way. I think that, it's normal to be a little bit concerned or a little bit nervous. Like everyone is going to have a whole array of emotions going in that way. But I think the more confidence you have and the more grounded and trusting you can be in everything that we've outlined so far, your PT, your surgeon, your faith, your family, just making sure that all of your pillars of support are like really well built and well stocked up. I would say the more you kind of check those boxes, the better everything else falls into place, I think.
Yeah, I would agree.
What do you feel like was the most surprising process or surprising thing for you after, during your rehab journey that way? Was there anything that really caught you off guard? Or, I talk with a lot of people who feel like there's something that comes up that it scares them or they weren't prepared for it that way. Do you feel like you had any moments like that?
I would probably say in the beginning process, I think one of the things that you told me, but I just learned online and learned through my own research is how valuable those first few days are after the surgery, how valuable PT is, and making sure you take care of it. And as much as we try, like no home is perfectly ACL safe, ACL friendly, and so I was just always worried about tripping. I was always worried about falling and stepping down, because you have one leg for a period of time, honestly, and when you're used to walking for 18 years of your life and you can't do that anymore, it's definitely testing. And so that was something that raised my nerves a little bit. If I would just instinctively step down, if I would instinctively fall on it, I had a little fear and a little anxiety from that at first. And aside from that, it's really just the learning to be human again. And I say that in the sense of, yes, the long term, it's I want to be back to a Division I athlete, but short term, it's I want to learn how to walk. I want to learn how to be normal again. I want to learn how to go downstairs again. And for a period of time, you don't have that. And that was something that I had to figure out throughout my first phase of recovery, was how do I function? And I'm blessed enough to have a family around me that would help me with that. But I wanted to put all the work in order to be able to provide for myself, in the sense of going downstairs and doing those basic functions by myself. That's why I focus heavily on PT in that beginning section, just so I could function again.
Yeah, and I think the way that you broke things down too, right? Like obviously everyone wants to go back to sport. Everyone wants to play, lacrosse or soccer or whatever sport it is that they're trying to get back to. But what you just mentioned is taking that big goal and breaking it down into super small steps and using your support group to keep you accountable to them, right?
Mm.
Like whether it be walking, whether it be stair negotiation, whether it be, driving for the first time after surgery, because obviously you're dependent on other people and you kind of lose a little sense of that independence early on that way. Like all of those small wins that a lot of people kind of forget about or completely miss are really like super big deals. And I think that we need to celebrate them more and do a better job of kind of taking this long, grueling 9 to 12 month process and breaking it down into those like day by day, week by week, small little wins that way, because there's so many small things to celebrate along the way. And I think the more we kind of stack those wins over time, the better our progress becomes that way.
Right. And I think that when, Lord willing, you get to the end of the process and you look back at those little wins, you have such a repertoire of confidence that you can look back at. And I know, again, one of our favorites, David Goggins, in his book, Don't Can't Hurt Me, that I read a few years ago, he talks about the cookie jar. And the cookie jar is looking back on all those little accomplishments that actually get you through whatever hard time you're going through now. And for myself, it's trying to move up the depth chart, trying to get on the field, getting through conditioning, putting the work in when I don't want to. And that's what I'm facing now. But I know that I can get through that because I have this cookie jar of, hey, I got to zero extension within 2 weeks of surgery. And I was walking on time. I got off of crutches in this many weeks. And I did this or that in my recovery. I have all these accomplishments that I took from you and that we've noted and dates and how much time put into that. And I walked, I did this, I ran and I sprinted and all these different months. And I have this reservoir of these accomplishments. And I'm like, if I can do this, I can sprint during winter break in the cold grass because one, I wasn't able to do that at one point. I'm grateful I could even do that. And I can get through conditioning with the team and I can persevere through a tough comment or something coming out that I like. I can get through this because I have such a reservoir of confidence from my past accomplishments as well.
You missed two of my favorite moments in there, though. You went on a cruise and sent me a video of you doing pull-ups on the cruise, like
Oh,
five
wow.
weeks after surgery, which I thought was absolutely incredible. And didn't you bleach the hair?
Oh, I did. That you're bringing up. You have a better memory than I do, Dan. Yeah, I do. I always tell that story because I always blame the pain meds, but I wasn't even on pain meds when I did this. But I think maybe 2 weeks into my recovery, I was bored at home because what else do you do when you have ACL surgery? And I'd always wanted to have the bleach buzz cut, so I did that. But because I have black hair, I had to do it in 2 sessions that are 24 hours apart. And so I had PT in the morning with Dan in between those 2 sessions, and my hair was not where I wanted it to be. It was about the color of it was about pea color. It was not an attractive color. Not that the blonde was attractive either, but definitely better than whatever it was in between. And so I remember I wore a beanie in about 80-degree heat to PT, and I gave you a little peek when I lifted it up. I think you were as surprised as everybody else was. But yeah, I think you definitely have a better memory of some of these accomplishments than I do.
There's a lot of little things along the way, and it all somehow works together again for that greater good that we mentioned that way. And even something as small as just going on a cruise early on that way and proving to yourself, like, hey, look, like, yes, I've been stuck at home for the last month, but like, I can actually get out there and do things now, and I'm going to be okay. I think
Hmm.
some of those small little things actually make a huge difference that way
Yeah.
in the long term, that way. And, the other thing as we've been talking, I realize we've talked about a lot about your rehab journey, and we've talked about some of your different support groups back in homeland, Salisbury, Maryland, that way. But obviously, we're all just pieces of the puzzle here, and there was a lot of people that helped you out up at Bryant that way. And I know we talked a number of times about how much Bree helped you out with so many different things that way, and she was just an absolute dog throughout your process that way. So, what kind of happened throughout this entire journey that I wasn't physically able to see myself that way? When you were up at school in the fall semester, maybe in the spring semester, what kind of things were you doing, and what did it look like when you weren't like actually in like the homeland, so to
Yeah.
speak?
Yeah. I mean, I did do the majority of my recovery at school. And I think that, again, a lot of my success is based on the support I have around me. And I had a really incredible AT that was very adamant and supportive from day one with my recovery. I mean, Brianna Burnett, she knew my injury coming into school. She knew exactly who I was. I think I even met her before my surgery. We had to do a orientation here, and I wasn't even a student yet, and she allowed me to ice in the training room to get the swelling down. So I mean, she's been there since day one as well. And then obviously there was about 6, 7 months where I was doing PT up here. We were checking in nearly daily. I was in the training room every day. She gave me all the resources that I needed to be successful. She gave me the lifting plan. She showed me the form to do everything. She's been incredible, and I see her more than I see a lot of people because I'm also in there with recovery now outside of practice. But again, she's been there since day one, and that really just looked like a plan that we updated every 2 weeks with getting back to strength, getting back to running. We have incredible resources at Bryant when it comes to recovery and getting back to sport when it comes to PT. I just wanted to fulfill my responsibilities of showing up and doing the work, but a lot of it came down to those around me and how they supported me.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely incredible. And I think it's so beneficial to have that kind of support system built around you. And I think this really speaks to the volume too of what can happen when you bring everyone together, right? It's never just one person in these things. It's never just going to be your PT. It's never just going to be, your strength coach or one of your friends that way. It's everyone working together and the role that everyone plays. And obviously, you're one of the most important people, if not the most important people in this whole process that way because you're the one that actually has to do all of the work yourself that way. None of us can do it for you. We can kind of Sherpa you along that way. I've used that term a lot lately when talking with people about ACL rehab is at the end of the day, I'm just the guide here. Like I'm just kind of like the Google Maps that tells you where to turn and how fast to go and different things that way. You're the one that actually has to do all of the work and all of the effort yourself that way. So I think that understanding the role that everyone plays is important, but ultimately it all comes back to you at the end of the day, man.
Yeah, I think a big thing was me just show up every day. And there was days where I really didn't want to, and that I really could have used the extra hour and a half in my day, but I showed up every day. And if you want to go back to why my recovery went well, why I'm able to perform on the field the way I am today, it's because I showed up. And before you know it, those days will start adding up, and you'll start to see progress, and you'll start building up that cookie jar, and you'll start getting that confidence. Once that happens, it's just a ball that like almost avalanches down and snowballs down, and you will become a better athlete and a better human through it, truly. And it just comes down to showing up. And it's hard. It's really hard. And I've been there looking 9 months in the future, looking 4 months in the future and thinking, how am I ever going to do this? I think my dad said it, and I've had coaches that say it, but if you turn your headlights on when you're driving and you look past where your headlights are, that's when accidents happen. Like, look in front of you. Look, how am I going to win the next day? How am I going to win the next week? How am I going to show up today and do my PT? How am I going to show up tomorrow and do my recovery? How am I going to show up this day? And you start doing that before you know it'll pass by.
Great piece of advice, man. And I love that you brought up that cookie jar analogy again. I'm going to have to steal that one, man. Just that concept of stacking wins. And obviously, you've experienced a lot of wins in relation to the rehab, but this is also a really difficult time for you as a, new college student, freshman coming into a, university, like many hours from home that way. How are you able to kind of adjust to a very different lifestyle that way entering college, on that note as well, succeed academically, despite all of these different stressors and all of these different rehab demands and sport demands and different things that way that all kind of got mixed in there for you.
Sure. Yeah. I've always been pretty structured. And I think that part of my story is that I moved out of the house when I was 16 and went to a school across the bridge in Maryland. That kind of helped me a lot with my scheduling. And I went to a school that academically challenged me. And so when it came to carving out time for studying and homework, that never came as a challenge to me. But there were a lot of more expectations, even the expectation of taking an hour out of my day or an hour or two out of my day to do PT is definitely a stressor, and that's something where I could have spent my time on elsewhere. But at the end of the day, I always put my faith in God, and I trusted that His plan would prevail. And there were times where things had to give and pull, and times where I had PT at 8 p.m. and after practice, and I was tired. But there's a way that you have to work it out, because if you want to get back to where you want to be, you have to prioritize PT, and you have to prioritize the steps that's going to get you there. And again, like the biggest thing aside from getting back in the field, I was looking forward to after my PT was just getting the hour back. And as much as I said that, I think I told Bree that one time, and she said, "Well, you'll be back in here doing recovery anyways." And so she wasn't wrong, but recovery is a lot more fun than doing squats and lunges around. So I'm grateful for that.
No, 100%, man, 100%. And I think that's great advice and insight that way. And I think the other piece too is a lot of people look at this process and they think, how can I do it? Or how am I going to do it? Or can it even be done? And I think it's just so important to let people know that other people have done it successfully and they too can find success in this process that way, right? They can succeed academically, they can succeed in their rehab. Like, it is
Yeah.
actually possible to have your cake and eat it too here. But as you've come back to over and over again, you have to show up consistently. You have to be committed, and you're going to have to put a decent amount of work in. You've just got to
Yeah.
stay true to the process.
Yeah. I mean, you're going to hear two sides of the spectrum. You're going to hear the horror stories of people that surgeries went wrong and doing another surgery to remove scar tissue and they're doing this and that. I know you've shared a lot of those stories, or they're not running and they're a year into recovery and all these different things. But you're also going to hear the other side, which isn't helpful either, where it's you see these crazy athletes in the NFL and these crazy professionals that do this injury and they're back in 7, 8 months, but then they're also spending $1 million a year on recovery. And I think it is important to see the middle ground of there's normal people that have gotten through this and are successful from it. And there's normal people that are not spending hundreds of thousands of dollars on recovery and private trainers and are still back. And I think that's why it's important that you do things like this, where you're talking to athletes that from small towns, from non-traditional athletic towns, from not going to some crazy high-tech gym, and they're still back to doing the sport that they love. And so I'm really glad that I'm really honored that you allowed for me to speak into this and that you've chosen others to do the same.
100%, man. It's all about giving back at the end of the day, right? You can't go
Mm-hmm.
through life with a catcher's mitt in both hands. You got to throw stuff back every now and then. And I guess I'm wondering too, what's on the future or what's on the horizon for you? Because like we've talked about, you've checked the box for ACL rehab, you've checked the box for return to sport, you're crushing it academically, just a freaking academic weapon. So what's kind of the future going to look like, or what is the horizon going to bring for you?
Yeah, I think I said it earlier. I think I'm trying to focus on what's nearly in front of me. And right now, we have a really talented, incredible team at Bryant. And I think we're going to have an incredible season in front of us. We have a lot of talent. We have a lot of veteran experience in my position. And so my job right now is to be the best teammate and and fulfill my role in that team. And right now that is some around the scout defense, that's and around supporting the guys that are going to be getting the majority of the reps. And you look at it, I'm a redshirt freshman. I'm still in my first year of game or practice experience beyond the field, but I also have that experience of being in the film room for an extra year than a lot of the true freshmen. And so I'm very grateful for the area that I'm in. And I'm grateful for the extra year of eligibility that I have, but I'm not going to look too far in the future because I want to fulfill the role that I have right now. I know that if this team wants to accomplish what we do want to accomplish, and we have some pretty high goals, then each person on the team has to embrace and fulfill the role that they have. And that's going to be my goal right now for this season.
What do you feel like the overall vibe of the team is? Like, what is the kind of like character grounding force for the team that way? Because I know some teams, go out there and they're like, look, we're going to be the grittiest team, or we're going to be the most physical team, or, we're going to be the most skilled team, or, hey, we're just going to go out there and play for each other and see what happens. What do you feel like kind of that identifying character is for you and your teammates?
Yeah, there's tons of buzzwords when it comes to grit or love or toughness or culture, but you got to go out there and prove it. And regardless of what happens today, regardless of what happens in a week or 2 weeks when we play Providence, we have proven to ourselves that we're a tough team. We have gotten through some tough things in this fall, and that's something that I'm ultimately grateful for. That I know a lot of other programs look at to go through, but we have accomplished some really tough things already, and so we've proven to ourselves that we're a tough team. And if we're going to go to one word, I'd say it's tough. That's something that I truly believe in, but it's not a buzzword. It's not something that we're just going to slap on a t-shirt and wear in warm-ups. It's something that we've proven already. And I think that we're going to prove that this year as well.
I think you guys are going to have an absolutely phenomenal season that way. And obviously, I know this is something you've been waiting for and working for well over a year at this point that way. And as you mentioned, I appreciate your time and I appreciate the help that you've given, not just, to me through the podcast that way, but also through the rehabs of several other individuals over the last year and a half that way, because obviously to that point that I made before about giving it back, that's certainly something that you've done exceptionally well and really embodied that way. Is there anything else about your own journey that way, whether it be in relation to rehab or in relation to sport or in relation to what that future is going to look like for you, or anything that we missed as we were chatting today, Kijana?
I think that something that this process has taught me was how much I value not only athletic performance, but just being healthy as a human in general. And so again, I haven't looked too far in the future when it comes to what I want to do athletically, but I know that when my lacrosse career would end, that there would be something else that would fill that gap. And maybe it's not doing anything crazy. I don't think it's doing any David Goggins ultra marathons. But I think there would definitely be something there where I want to stay in shape. I think I have a passion for staying in shape. I have a passion for taking care of your body. And so I know you have plenty of ideas. I'll probably reach back out to you with that. But that's definitely something that would be in my future. And I think something that I realized or recognized very early on in the process was that as much as it sucks in the moment, I was part of a new group, a new fraternity of people that have gone through this kind of injury and came back from it. And that's something I take a lot of pride in, and that I'd love to give back to as much as possible when people go through these kind of injuries. And maybe it's not knee, maybe it's Achilles, any of these major injuries that take you out for a while. I believe that I almost have a story that I can share with somebody, and that's a big part. Again, tying back to my faith, I'm glad that I went through this suffering because I get to have a new type of empathy towards those that are going through it too. And that's such a huge part of my testimony, that if it can be part of somebody else's and God can use me to lift somebody else up and bring them closer to Him, then I'm so glad that I went through it.
To the point that you made, it's, maybe not necessarily leaning into your own understanding, but acknowledging other things and other powers and allowing them to direct your paths that way.
Yeah,
Um, Obviously, you're a phenomenal resource. And one of the things that I really respect about you is just how giving you are with everything, your time, your knowledge, everything that way. For people who want to find out more about you, connect with you, talk about your process, whether it be from a faith standpoint, from a rehab standpoint, from a lacrosse standpoint, like I'm sure you're probably giving lessons or something like that, or who knows, maybe someone listening wants to give you some NIL deal or money. I don't know what the nature of people reaching out is going to be, but for those that do want to get in contact with you, how can they find you?
sure. Lord willing, I'm glad to reach out to anybody, and if anybody has any NIL money, I wouldn't be turning it down. But my Instagram is Kijana .Lloyd. Then you can reach out to me there. I usually respond pretty quickly. And if you know Dan, you can reach out to him. He can give you my number. And that's really it. But aside from that, I'd love to reach out and talk to anybody who has any questions. I'm here to help.
Yeah, no, for sure. We'll have to link to all of that in the description below. Below that way, if you didn't quite catch it, you can just click there. And I'll even throw a link to my favorite Instagram username ever. ACLs are terrible.
Yeah,
Uh, that,
I'm not
that
sure if I'm still logged into that account, but if you message it, maybe I'll see it eventually.
yeah, that was a really crafty one, my guy. I really appreciate your time and everything you're doing, man.
Thank you, man. I appreciate being on here. It's really an honor.